Hello, very pleased to meet today Jim Boyle. He's the CEO of the Sustainability Roundtable. And I would like Jim to start with you, if you can introduce yourself to the actionable ESG, and we'll go through a number of topics we'd like to discuss. I'm very excited to meet you.
Thank you, Manuel, and I'm pleased to meet you and appreciate the opportunity to visit with you. My name is Jim Boyle, as you mentioned. I'm the founder and CEO of Sustainability Roundtable, Inc., which I created 17 years ago this last Earth Day. And I did it after a career that began with Senator John Kerry in Washington, D.C. at a very junior level. I then returned to Massachusetts for law school, and then went to work as a federal law clerk, ultimately at the appellate level. And then I went to a large law firm headquartered here in Boston doing corporate environmental defense. And that was interesting intellectually, but not what I wanted to do long term. So I left to join the Gore campaign. And after the vice president prevailed in that election, but then lost in the Supreme Court, I frankly felt free to go into business. And so I moved to Northern California, where I always been interested in sort of exploring. And I got into corporate real estate. And I spent most of my years in corporate real estate with Tremble Crow Company Corporate Advisory Services. And it was really there from 2001 to 2006 that I saw an opportunity for a pre-competitive strategic advisory service in corporate sustainability. And I saw that because I saw that our most sought after clients like American Express and McKesson and Cisco were using corporate sustainability as a lens through which to help them better see the opportunity in continuous optimization and continuous innovation in a way that was aligned with the ecology that sustains us all. And I just found that super fascinating. And so a few years later, I started this company and went into it full time.
Well, thank you, Jim. And actually, you started already on the first topic I wanted to address today, which are the regional and global trends that you observe from your company, and again, the how these trends manifest in terms of sustainable business and how did they change? I think you started your company in 2008, so there is a lot of history to go over.
Sure. Well, what's been the most fascinating to watch and to some degree, Manuel, to participate in is the change in power generation from a fuel-based generation to a products-based generation. And our clients who are, we have a disproportionate number of globally scaling technology companies, particularly in the information communication and technology industry. And as technologists, they helped educate me and my, at the time, small firm into the fact that the change going on to clean energy was also a change from fuel-based electricity generation to to product-based electricity generation. And that meant that it made sense to look at the fuel-based electricity generation in the paradigm of resource economics, and that was fundamentally a scarcity framing, and then to take a distinct view of product-based electricity generation that really framed it in the context of manufacturing economics, and so therefore had things like learning rates and exponential adoption curves. And this really in forward modeling, makes all the difference, right? And so Hewlett Packard brought us in 2012 to look at their first forward contract to cause a new utility scale project. And that was with First Wind out of Boston. It was a 112 megawatt wind farm in Texas. And we were fascinated by the proposed contractual structure because it was like an advanced market commitment in vaccines. It was a commitment to buy the results of the project if they got the project done. And back then it was called and consistent with all that, it was called a contract to purchase variably priced RECs or renewable energy certificates. And that's now what's called a virtual power purchase agreement. And that transaction has become hugely popular and really so popular that if you think of the situation we face with human caused climate breakdown as darkening our global horizon, this is really a very bright spot on that darkening horizon because it has caused more than 200 gigawatts of new clean energy generation capacity in just North America in just the last 10 years, all of it done on a voluntary basis because these transactions are commercially compelling as well as environmentally remarkably positively impactful. Um, and it really even helped inspire, according to some of the relevant Senate staffers I still know, it really helped inspire the Inflation Reduction Act and all of its focused subsidies of these large transactions, which of course is under assault right now. But it just goes to show it's not just in the 200 gigawatts these transactions directly caused. It's also in how policymakers reacted to it all over the world because it's also gone into Europe, and we also help our member clients aggregate their procurement of utility scale renewable energy in the European Union as well. When you ask about trends, I'd say the biggest trend is this remarkable trend from fuel-based electricity generation to product-based electricity generation. And I'll just note that in 2024, the International Energy Association found that 92% of the new generation was from clean energy sources. And 81% of that was from, not of that, but 81% overall was from solar. So, within that trend from fuel to products, the solar component is massive and truly remarkable. One of the most interesting factoids I've heard of in regard to this and almost in general is that it took 68 years to get the first terawatt of photovoltaic electricity. And then it took 2 years, 23 and 24, to get the second. And now it looks like as we approach mid-year 2025, we're going to get the third. So we've just gone to multiple terawatts annually, if not this year, then next year, because this is truly an exponential adoption curve. And it is headed towards being a ubiquitous technology that does get less expensive as it scales. And in that way, probably the only analog I can think of is the move to mobile telephones, where sort of nobody was able to get their head around it was all going to go mobile because it just seemed impossible. Just when you get into the numbers of how many mobile phones were needed and how much infrastructure was needed and how would the costs ever come down sufficiently. But we got there and we got there so much faster than even the most informed people thought. And that has to do with many things, including the power of learning rates, where, with each doubling of the technology, there's a halving of the cost, and also just the power of exponential adoption. I mean, when you're doubling, you get
We,
you get to a
so
high number pretty fast.
2 or 3 points I'll try to unpack. And the first thing, I'm an electric or electronic engineer by training. So when you talk to me about electricity as a product, you have to educate me right now. The second thing I heard, it's a variable contract, which I'm used to fixed contracts, which are, I'm not sure if the majority, but please educate myself and our audience on this uh, fascinating way to look at first at electricity and the contractual obligations.
Well, just on the electricity, I'm talking more about what generates the electricity. What's the
Mm.
driver of the generation of the incremental electricity? And natural gas still sets the marginal price for electricity in most markets, and that is subject to natural gas, the commodity. And so
Mhm.
you're exposed to commodity risk,
Mhm.
when you're relying on natural gas to generate your electricity. And the more of your electricity generated by natural gas, the more you're exposed to that commodity-based, potential volatility. And you see this right now with the Trump 2 administration allowing the export of liquefied natural gas, which is a good thing for natural gas producers, but might not be a good thing for the buyers of natural gas because suddenly the demand for natural gas goes up substantially when you can export it to Europe, which needs it. And so then therefore the cost of natural gas goes up, not down, right? And that's a classic example of the commodity that is natural gas going responding to market forces of demand and supply. Conversely, a solar, a utility scale solar array, now almost always with an integrated lithium ion battery behind the same point of interconnection, that's a product that's going to generate this electricity, and it isn't fed by a commodity. It just sits there and using photovoltaic technology, transmutes the
The
sun,
energy.
the solar, the irradiance into electrons. And so when that as that product scales and it's produced all over the world, and whether we Trump too may slow things down in the United States for good or bad. China is accelerating forward. So the technology is going to continue to get better in terms of it's going to be a higher efficiency, more reliable, less costly solution every year. And Dwayne Farmer at the University of Oxford leads a team that has found a really solid 12% decrease in solar as a deployed technology for each doubling of solar, that I was mentioning earlier, and there's been a lot of doubling. And so it used to take 2.5 years for the amount of solar to double. Now it's more like less than a year that it
Sure.
doubles. And as it doubles, it goes down another 12%. And this is consistent enough, Manuel, where back in 2012, when we were first looking at this, we looked at that 12% decrease for each doubling. And on the trend that was then established, we thought that by 2018, the price of doing these projects would be down below grid price, right? So that our most of our clients weren't and aren't like Hewlett Packard, and that they aren't ready to commit to a price of electricity that is above the current grid price. And they're certainly not ready to commit to a price of electricity that's above the grid price and lock it in for 10 or 15 years, which is what you used to have to do back in 2012. But because of the established learning rate on solar, every 2 years, then every 1 year, it started going down 12% in deployed cost. Meanwhile, there were subsidies of 30% from the federal government. And the combination meant that these projects, our clients could commit to these projects at a price by 2018 in the most favorable markets like ERCOT, where that was below grid price. And that's when we knew it would be popular, because they could commit to 15 years at below grid price. And that would be sufficient for the developer to go out and get her financing and actually develop the project and even operate the project and then sell the resulting electrons into the local market. And she could do that all because she had high credit off-takers, as the buyers are called in this market. She had high credit off-takers who were committed contractually to pay for the minimum price. And if she didn't
So
realize the minimum price in the sale to the local market, they would make her whole up to that price. They'd be
yeah,
required by,
so
by their contract.
let me see if I'm able to unpack it.
Okay.
You brought to me a completely new business model. And if I think in terms of business models, as you indicated, the cost of producing electricity today is gauged by a commodity called natural gas. And it's this transfer of energy from one form to another, from burning the gas, heat, electricity. Now you have a product which is an electronic product by, generally speaking, at least the solar panels are very similar to producing there are semiconductors actually, building fabs. And the batteries which are also more electrical and electronic. So now you have a product which follows a Moore's curve. This is I'm sure you're familiar, is this continuous improvement in the prices as the production grows, right? So you have as you indicated, you have a reduction that you can estimate at least based on the models. And now this is the product that you buy. You're not buying electricity, you're buying access to solar panels and batteries.
Yes.
Is my understanding
Yeah,
roughly
that's
correct?
exactly it. And so it's in fact a more conservative investment structurally because you're not exposed to commodity, volatility. What it's taking another way to think about it is it's taking an operating cost, which is your purchase of electricity, and changing it into a capital cost where what's the cost of the project, and that is determined by a lot of things, including interest rates. So there's obviously complexity and business risk, but it's structurally more conservative because it's more known, at the time you make the commitment. Now, the price of electricity could go to zero, right? Theoretically, it's never done that. It actually regularly goes up, of course, um, over time. But it could go to zero. And if it went to zero, then, the companies that had committed to a minimum price would lose, that would because they've gone long on that minimum price. Um, but, these are businesses and they make probabilistic business decisions and they
Sure.
think it's highly unlikely, electricity is going to zero. And they indeed think it's unlikely electricity is going down. And so if electricity is going up, which many of our clients are persuaded it's likely to do because it has been going up, and now we're adding AI and the transportation sector is being electrified and the building sector is being electrified and the economy is still growing. So there's a lot of increased demand and increased demand against relatively static supply, increases the price of electricity, which is good for these transactions. Um, and these transactions are good for controlling the rise of electricity because they are creating supply.
So anyway, even if the price goes down, they have the capability to hedge if they choose so. So what I learned from you, and thank you, in the last 10 minutes or so, is the fact that you can now use current business models which are related to products, more like building a plant, then it's actually a fuel, natural gas, that gets converted to electricity and has a variable cost. And every time you open the newspaper, you may see the price going up and down depending on what's happening in remote places, not to mention Ukraine and Russia and Germany, remote to, you know,
Yes,
to
that's
US.
true. And you can hedge these transactions. But another way to think about it and how these transactions actually got started with companies exactly like Hewlett Packard is as a hedge themselves, right?
Sure.
Because Hewlett Packard buys a lot of electricity, and so they buy it from, the conventional generators now, and so they're exposed to the price volatility, and they don't like that, right? Because they're very well run, commercial enterprises, and so they seek a hedge that is not associated with capital markets, which this capital project based hedge is perfect for, right? And this is
Right.
really what started this, because that is a real keen business interest that they've got to solve for. They can't have huge exposure to volatility. So they say, okay, we also need data centers. So we've got these data centers. They're the entities for which we're buying all this huge electricity. Why don't we create an electricity plant ourselves and do it in a way that hedges our exposure to
Sure.
the electricity we're buying off the grid? And that's how these transactions started, and it's still how they're used by the world's hyperscalers, which still drive this market. Alphabet, Meta.
I'm saving a question about AI, but before that question, I wanted to learn a little bit about the Sustainable Business and Enterprise Roundtable that you created, and maybe started with what is the core of your idea to create this. You mentioned it a little bit in your introduction, but maybe you can emphasize this.
Sure. Well, we're persuaded, Manuel, that the more sustainable approach to business is the more collaborative approach to business, because that brings in a distributed intelligence that is greater than any one of us or any individual team can achieve. And that creates, not only an economy of scale where, not every company needs to go out and get their six-figure, sustainability advisor. They can join with dozens of others and get a low five-figure sustainability advisor. And so there's economies of scale that make a lot of sense, but there's also related economies of intellect. When you get all these really talented, really focused people together who are trying to do the same basic thing, which is make their enterprise more sustainable, there's a lot of collaborative learning going on. And one of the areas where I think that's sort of most memorably manifest is we started with a real focus on corporate real estate, because that's had been my field before creating this company. And one thing that I learned after years of studying, more sustainable buildings, was that when the design charrette for the building included the future tenants, included the future maintenance engineers, included the future landscapers, included the local municipal, officials. When everything was sort of brought forward into the design charrette, then the building was designed to be much more sustainable than if it was, just the financiers and the architects and let's say the builder. And so that's when it really hit me that why this was working so well in that we were bringing the intelligence we actually always needed forward in the process so that we weren't trying to correct things that we never should have done in the first place.
And I should add that, you are in some way ahead of your time, because now we talk about smart buildings and intelligent buildings. In AKFI, we're also looking also at the economy of scale by getting people around to create a standard for supply chain and help the suppliers and the supply chain to have a framework agreement, very much in the line of what you've done many years ago. So I'm very encouraged, but what you're saying about the buildings, for instance, and actually now we're looking at using technology for buildings to be intelligent and spend less energy, be much more livable, shall say, right? Because they are adaptable. Before that, we
Yes,
said build something for 40 years and stays there the way we built it in day one.
yes, and it is so interesting the intersection of intelligence and collective intelligence and greater sustainability because
Absolutely.
being unsustainable is not an intelligent path. In general, we our motto at Sustainability Roundtable Inc. is helping align business with life. And we almost never come across anybody who doesn't think business would be better aligned with life and could be better aligned with life. Nor do we come across many people who think that business is aligned with life. So somehow what we call business has become misaligned with the rest of our lives and what supports life. And very few people think that's a good idea, and many people would like to see a greater alignment. But how to actually do that, takes real intelligence. And real intelligence, in my estimation, is more collaborative intelligence, right? Because we all have the intelligence we have. But when we get together and explore what we can do together, we learn a lot and new things that none of us individually would have come up with, come
And
forward.